All right, good afternoon and welcome. Hope you had some nice dinner or foodish-like components out there, and you are ready to the, it's not the grand finale yet, but it's closing up. You have now officially survived at least 3/4 of the NIC conference so far. How many, I do recognize some of you. How many of you were here in the last session? A good few of you. Welcome back. And for those of you who are new here, my name is Johan. I love working with deployment. I've been doing that for a long time, too long time, I think. I love questions, but this session is special. We are going to build a complete solution from nothing, and I mean nothing, not even a server, to finish in an hour. So I have a 57-minute demo, more or less, in 3 parts. Now, in the real world, this will not take you 57 minutes. It will take you about 2.5 hours to do this back home. But I have shortened some of the most time-consuming parts, like waiting for a capture of an image, waiting for a server to be built. That's about it. Everything we will do. So hold your horses. This is my lab environment. This is what we're going to build: a domain controller and a ConfigMgr server running RC1 or ConfigMgr 012. Installing SQL, installing MDT, and all of those components. This is the end result. To help us with this, we have 3 major points in this session. And we will create the lab servers. We will create ourselves a reference image, and then we will build a ConfigMgr OSD solution and deploy it. All these things we are going to make in an hour. So, what's hydration? Hydration is based on MDT 2010 Light Touch. It's a free component you can download from my blog. It's basically a ready-made deployment share that you will import into MDT. So MDT is a free download from Microsoft. And on my site, I provide you with a ready-made share that you can add, and we'll build those servers. So it looks like the following. When you download a share, you will get a folder structure. And I hope this is looking okay. Check. In that folder structure, it's a giant file download, by the way. It's about 142 kilobytes. It's just a folder. In each folder, or in the folder, you will find subfolders. This is where you copy your licenses. So you will have to find the media for, wrong server here, this one. You will have to find the media for SQL, and you will have to copy that to this folder into the source directory. You will have to find the service pack 2 update, copy that to that folder. You will have to download ConfigMgr, and you will have to copy that to the ConfigMgr folder. So basically, pouring in content into those folders. And then you update the deployment share, and you get a giant ISO. You will get about a 9 gig ISO containing everything. Then you spawn 2 virtual machines. And I wrote a PowerShell script to do that. So I'm using the PowerShell library just to create a few VMs. It looks like this. It's a free download from Coplex. So I will run the script, and it will give me back a few VMs configured to boot from this ISO. All right, I go back to my console. I will have 2 new VM. I will power the first one on, the domain controller. It will boot on the ISO. It's already connected. And while it's booting, let me show you that sequence. That's part of the download, by the way. The sequence that installs the domain controller looks like this. It's just a ready-made sequence that will do all that. It will install Active Directory and configure it. It will install DHCP, create some file structure, and we're done. We have a ready-made domain controller. The configuration is stored in an ini file. So if you go here, this is the setting for my domain controller. If you want to change it to other domain or other IP address or something else, this is where you would go ahead and change. If you want to add another DHCP scope option, other DHCP settings, this is where you change that. So I go back to my machine. This is what happens. I select my domain controller and I hit go. It will take about 20 minutes and then I have a ready-made domain controller. Everything is fully automated. Then I will fire up the second VM after the domain controller is running, and I will select the second server to build. And that will take about an hour 10 minutes if you have a good host. And then you have a fully ready ConfigMgr server. Because that sequence is doing all that. It's installing everything we need for a ConfigMgr site. Windows deployment services, SQL, all the updates, configure the firewall, set the memory, and then install ConfigMgr. It says Beta 2, but it is RC1. It's just the heading here that is not renamed for me. But again, it's a fully automated build. Done. 2 virtual machines. Right. Then, when we have those 2 servers running, we need a reference image. And as I said in my previous session, I like to build my reference image in light touch. And then I like to deploy it through ConfigMgr. The reason I do it with light touch is faster, easier, more compatible, and short story has more options and saves me time. So that's why I do it in light touch. So let's go ahead and do that, because when hydration is completed, it looks like this. This is the domain controller. When the build is completed, I just click close. This is how it looks. This is the ConfigMgr server. When it's completed. This is what I have. A domain controller and the ConfigMgr server hydrated for me. So first I need to do some settings in my Active Directory. I need to have a user because light touch requires a folder. That's the requirement. But I need to have a user who has access to read from that folder. So I will go into Active Directory on my domain controller and I will create a user. So I will start Active Directory users and computers. I will wait patiently. I will create a OU called deployment. And I will create a user which I will name build account. If I can type. Assign a super secret password. And some settings. And off we go. I have a user. Now, the next thing we need to do is to install MDT. And this is something that I have added in my setup folder. I have the MDT installation files there. So I will run through the MDT setup. It's very difficult. A lot of clicking here. And God, I'm on the wrong server. You create users on domain controllers. You install MDT on deployment servers. Sorry about that. I was just checking you out, and you didn't warn me. So I'll run the setup on the right server. How about that? Next, accept, next, next, done. Or soon to be done. This is it's a Microsoft moment. It's waiting. I'm finished. I have MDT, the light touch components of it. I will start the workbench. This is the main UI where you create the deployment share that you use to create the reference image. And it's an MMC3 console. Meaning we are lucky if it doesn't crash on us twice. So I will create the deployment share. I will select new. I will specify a folder where to put it. And I will share it. And I will give it a description. Now I have a deployment share. I have a container for my builds. It's refreshing, it's coming, Here we go. This is just a repository. This is where you will add the operating system you want the reference image of. And I'm going to create a reference image of Windows 7 64-bit. So I will create a folder. I don't have to, but I normally do that for visibility. So I create the Windows 7 folder. And I will right-click and I will say import or import OS. And then I'll simply point it to a folder where I have an operating system. And I happen to downloaded the Windows 7 media to a folder here. So I'll just copy this name. I will select move because it's quicker on the same volume. But this is just the folder where I have my Windows source media. I give it a name. And I import it. Done. I have added an OS. I will rename it because I literally hate the default naming convention in MDT. I would like to have it to something more readable. Doesn't make much difference if you only have one, but try add 10 and keep the default naming. It's a nightmare. So I have added the OS. I will create a sequence. Give it an ID, hopefully a unique one. And not too long one. A name. Standard client, yes. Select the OS I added. No product key needed, it's an enterprise. I will give it a password. I'm done. I have a sequence. We will go into details in that sequence in a minute, but I will take that when I'm updating the deployment share. So, the settings of the deployment share is the settings for our deployment. And normally I will only use a 32-bit client because that can deploy 32 and 64-bit images. But now, since I don't have those setup files added and I only need a 64-bit one, I will simply select this one to save some time. I will go to the WinP tab and I will give it a good name. That boot image. And I will hit OK. Now, when we start the light touch deployment, from that boot image, it will connect to the deployment share, read the settings, and behave accordingly. And by default, it will stop you and ask for a bunch of questions. I don't want that. So I have prepared a fixed set of rules that will configure the wizard not to ask so much. So I will simply take those files and dump them into that folder. Replace the existing one. Now I have changed the behavior of the MDT wizard. So now I can update this one. And it will now create my boot image. And this process will take about 65 seconds or so to complete. So now we have your first option, there will be two more, to ask questions. Do you have any questions at this point? Yes, sir. The question is, and it's a good question, where are those settings documented? They are documented in the MDT help file, which is available on the help menu, not right now, but also in the file system in the installation bin folder. This is where you have the MDT help file. If you go to the reference section in it, this is where you will find about 97% or so of all the available settings. So for example, here you have all the skip things that will skip different parts of the wizard. So it's in the documentation. Good question. All right. My deployment share is on its very way to finish off. I think we will have time for one more question. Any question? All right. What's make this tick? What's make this automated? This file will go into the boot image. In this file, I have added information about the account I created in Active Directory. The share to connect to and username and password. And remember, this is done in a very separate environment, so I don't consider it to be a security risk having a password in a clear text like this, because it's only you that will have access to that boot image. It's not used in production. It's used to create a reference image. All right, the image is done. Good. I will take that to my host, so I need to connect to my host. Because I can't do copy and paste in Hyper-V. I can do that in VMware, I can't do it in Hyper-V. So I have to do a net use to my server, using a very secret password here. And I will connect to my server, go into the boot folder, I will get the ISO, I will copy it, I will paste it on my host. Done. I will take a VM, an empty client, I will go to clean snapshot. I will mount the ISO I created. Here we go. I'm mounting the ISO and I will boot the virtual machine. Now, I don't care if you guys are using Hyper-V or if you're using VMware, but there better be one of them when creating reference images. It's simply the most reliable way of creating reference images. Do not, never, ever create reference images on physical machines. You will not get a good image like a good image you get when doing it from a VM, from a virtual machine. Not only will you get the best possible image, you will also save time. Because in a virtual machine environment, well, we can use snapshots when we are testing and developing our image, something that is really tricky to do on physical hardware. So you can see it's now connecting back to my server. I will get 2 questions because I configured the wizard to give me 2 questions. It will ask me what sequence I would like to deploy. And it will know, or eventually know, would like to know where to store it. So it will really soon give me a suggestion where to put that file. If I wanted to, I could automate this as well. That would just be 2 more lines in the ini file. And then these 2 selections would also be suppressed. So this is simply where I want to store it when it's done. That's it. Off we go. In about 45 minutes, there is a Vim file on the server. Because this sequence will deploy the OS, it will patch it, it will install any applications if you added them as well, but I didn't. It will sysprep it, and it will capture it and store it on that server share. So the process from now on is fully automated. And I happen to have the result of this process in a folder on that server already. So now we have created a reference image. Now, we need to step up and put this into production. We need to set up the ConfigMgr environment, integrate with MDT, create all the packages, and deploy it. And the reason you should integrate with MDT is because you get about 100 plus additional OSD features on top of ConfigMgr, and it will help you and make your life easier in terms of deployment. All right, let's do this. So I will go to my domain controller because I need a few more service accounts for ConfigMgr. So I will skip this wizard here. So I will go back to Active Directory and I'll create 2 more accounts. The first one is CM-JA, and that's not Johan, that's join account. The machine, the account I will be using to store or join machines into my domain. And this account, I need to add permissions to the OU or OUs where I store machines in. So I'm going to store objects or machines in my workstation's OU. So I will go to properties and I will see nothing like security. Because in order to see security, I need to go into advanced features in ADUC. And then when I do properties, I will have my security tab. And I will go to advanced. I will not click add here because that will give me too much permissions. I will only assign the absolute minimum number of permissions. So I will click add, advanced, and then add. I'll have add a join account. And I will assign it first the permission to create and delete computer objects. Really useful for bare metal deployments. Then I will click add one more time because when I do redeployments, refreshes, I also need to have permissions to update existing computer objects. So I need to read and write properties, I need to read and modify permissions, I need to reset and create passwords here, or change passwords, and I need the validated rights for the DNS and the SPN name. 8 permissions, and yes, this session is being recorded. I can see you taking notes here. So these are the minimal permissions needed for the join account. I also need a network access account. This is an account that will have access to the ConfigMgr packages. So we create a new user. Network access account. Give it the password. And I'm done there. Now, ConfigMgr 012 has a new discovery method. It will find boundaries from Active Directory. And if you have IP subnets configured, it will actually find them too. But by default, Active Directory doesn't create an IP subnet for you. So we'll do that. I will go into DS site. I will go to my subnets. I will create a new subnet. My only subnet. It's for this site, right? And now I have a... Did I already do that? I could swear I clicked it. Let's try again. Click harder. I think that helps. I like the arrow though. It's already existing, but no, it's not. So now I have an IP subnet here. So now I will go over to my ConfigMgr server. Right? And I will make sure to start the console. And enable those discoveries. This is the new console in ConfigMgr. Luckily, not using MMC anymore. In administration, I will go here. If I can click correctly. Discovery methods. Forest discovery. I will enable it and say it, configure it to create sites for me. Hit OK. Will you run it now? Yes, please. And it will run. And I can monitor this in the ConfigMgr log files. I have a soon forest discovery popping up. And it will now take a few moments to run that discovery. And we should actually see it creating those boundaries inside ConfigMgr for us. Should only take about 20-25 seconds to do this. All right, let's see. Discovery belongs to this. It's not yet ready. I'm looking for a few more lines. Let's see if we actually got them. Yeah, we have the sites now, being populated by the forest discovery. Second is, I need to discover my systems. So I normally use system discovery to find machines, existing machines. So I will just add in and look for all machines that I have in my workstation's OU. Fair enough. Polling schedule, I will use the default, and I'm good to go there. Yes. So that's the boundaries, and that's to how we assign clients to ConfigMgr. But in ConfigMgr 12, we need more things than we needed in ConfigMgr 07. We need boundary groups. So I will create a boundary group. I will give it a good name. And when you have the boundaries, you need to add your sites to them. So I will add one or more sites to this boundary. On the reference tab, I can say use this boundary group for site assignment. This is how I assign my ConfigMgr clients to this site. I can also add DPs down here in content location, but I will actually do that in a minute. I will use a distribution point group for that instead. So this is all I will do for the boundary groups. Assigning the site and configure it to be my site assignment. Then I will create the distribution point group. This is also new, required in ConfigMgr 12. I will call it AQDP. I will not limit this to any collection right now, but I will add as a member my ConfigMgr distribution point, my only one. All right, so now I've added in my DP. We also need to configure the network access account, again, to have permissions to the packages. And that is done in sites. If I right-click my site, site components, I have down here software distribution. This is where we configure the network access account. I will specify, and this is weird, but you do not select existing. You select new. even though you created it before. Now we can browse in ConfigMgr 12. We don't have to know the exact name. Type in the password. And we can actually verify as well if we want to that the password actually works by connecting to a server using that account. But I'm pretty confident I type it correctly. So now I've configured software distribution. That's the base config in ConfigMgr. Now we need to add the deployment parts to it. So we need to install an update to MDT 2012. There is a bug in beta 2 in the MOF file which is causing the PowerShell scripts to fail if you try to run them directly from the sequence. It's a single line change in the MOF file and you'll be good. It's in the release notes, it's documented on the deployment guy's blog, but you need to add that file over to the MDT installation directory, to the SCCM folder, and replace the existing file. Now you can close the console and you can run the integration that will add the MDT components into ConfigMgr. So I will run the integration, and since I'd already started the console once, it will know my site server name and my site code. Sorry? Could I check the network access account? Certainly I could. Let me just run through the integration first. Well, doesn't really matter, but yes, I did select the wrong account. Good catch, sir. Let's go back and fix it. This account doesn't need to have any special permissions or anything, but sure, I should have the right account to it. That's the account. All right, we try that one. Thank you. So we added the integration. We need a few folders to store packages in. And we need a folder for our state migration point. So I will create a folder for my state migration point. And I will create a folder for my packages. And in packages, I will create a sort of a folder structure in here for my different packages. I don't have to, but I like it. This is just to have a sort of a structure to rely on. And of course, we'll take all of them and move into an OSD subfolder. Now we're good. Because we may have applications as well here, not related to OSD. So that's a structure. Now I need to add a state migration point. So I will go to Sites and Server Roles. And I will wait patiently. Add roles. Specify name. The machine I'm using. I will select the state migration point role. This is used for replace scenarios for storing the content and doing the mapping between the old machine and the new machine. I will add the folder I created. I will specify maximum number of clients, 500. Minimum free space on the disk, not 20 meg, but gigs. This is a good setting or a starting value. And I will adjust the deletion policy. The default is 1 day. I think it's a little bit too quick. I would like to change it to 2 weeks. Meaning it will be the backup of the old machine when replacing computers will be stored 2 weeks after a successful restore, in the very event something happens. I need to add a boundary group. I created one before, so I will add that one. And I'm good for now. By creating the folder and adding the state migration point, I have USMT configured now for replace scenarios. Then we need, in order to do PXE deployment, to do bare metal deployment, we need Windows Deployment Services. And the sequence, my hydration sequence, already installed it. But I actually prefer still, even in ConfigMgr 012, to configure it manually first. ConfigMgr will do that for you, but by doing it manually yourself, you will actually see that the service will start. Because if it doesn't start now, it will never ever start when ConfigMgr tries to add its provider to it. So I will just do a base config, select the folder, select the policy, that's it. And hopefully the service should start. Question, yes? The IIS configuration is not the same as in 07. The VDS configuration is exactly the same, yeah. Yes. The exact same from a WDS perspective, not in the UI later. I don't need any images, I just wanted to make sure that the service was started and it's now green and go. All right. Then I need to enable PXE inside ConfigMgr. So I will go to my distribution points, because PXE is now a setting on the DP. It's not a separate site role. So I will go to PXE. I will select enable. And yes. I will enable this one. I will enable this one. I will not enable this one, because currently in RC1, this one is a bit buggy. As I said in my previous session, it's in the release notes, and I'm sure everybody of you reads the release notes. Right. So I click OK, and since this is part of my distribution point, I can review this in the disk manager log file. So by opening this file, I will actually see it will eventually install the provider and give me a sort of good to go here. It's coming. Here we go. Configure PXE, install PXE, provider is already installed. Check. Good to go. That's what I was looking for. Now, to do OS deployment, we need boot images. Do not use the default boot images. They are not good enough. They do not handle databases, they do not handle HTA pages, and their shorthand story won't do. So, we will go to the console, go to the software library, expand OSD, and I will go to boot images, and I will right click, and I will say create boot image using MDT. So it's a small wizard. I will specify my package's source, which I have to share, which I didn't do before. So I will share it. And I will do something that I normally wouldn't do, except for ConfigMgr. I will give everyone full control on the share. Because ConfigMgr, the SMS provider, needs to change permissions of stuff in here, and it will break if you don't. We will lock down security on the file level rather than on the share level. So I shared it. I hope, unless I clicked cancel. It's shared all right. I will specify the folder. OSD, boot, and I will give it a name. Zero touch, WinPE, 30, and x86. I will assign the same name to the package. I will adjust the scratch space, the temporary space in WinPE. This is now an option here. I will use the ADO components. Yes, thank you. I will enable command support for troubleshooting. It's also new in this wizard. And now it will take about 3 minutes and 20 seconds to create the boot image. Possibly 21 if it's a bad day. This is your second chance to ask questions. Do we have any questions so far? All right. The boot image is also added to the distribution point eventually. So we will still be able to monitor that behavior by reviewing the disk manager log file. But I will wait and show you that for a while. So while we're waiting for this, let's do a recap what we have done so far, just briefly, since you didn't have any questions. I did give you the chance though, and now you're stuck with a recap. So one, we did dehydration. On my blog, there is a video on how to do that. There are ready-made step-by-step guides, but the shorthand version is you download a zip file, you extract it, you find your licenses, OSS, ConfigMgr, SQL, and all those, and pour it into the right folder. Then you update the deployment share, and you get that giant ISO. Then you create 2 VMs. You give them 1 gig of memory for the domain controller. You give it 4 gig of memory for the ConfigMgr server. At least 300 gigs of disk space, expandable probably, if it's a lab and test at least. And then you start them. First the domain controller, and wait 20 minutes, and then the ConfigMgr server, and wait about an hour. And then that server will be in the state where it was when I started to do most of the demos here. Secondly, we created the reference image. The process took about 10 minutes to get the infrastructure up and running. Running it will take about 45. But if you can beat that with ConfigMgr, from scratch to finish in 10 minutes, I would like to know about it. It's just not possible unless you script all of it. Sometimes when you create a reference image, you want to do, now it's fully automated. From when I selected my sequence and selected where to store it afterwards, it will run through automated all the way. What if you have that one specific setting or that one specific application that you need to do a manual tweak into? Well, in Light Touch, if I open up that sequence I created before, it's coming. It's busy. It's creating boot images. in that sequence, the whole 40K XML file, which is currently loading, here we go. Somewhere around here, I will make a copy of the tattoo action just to get a template, and I will add this name instead. And I will name it suspend. What this means is that when the sequence is in the OS running, come to this step in the sequence, it will suspend, it will pause. And at that point, you can install that application manually, do that setting manually, or whatever you needed to do on the machine. You can reboot it about 10 times if you want to. And what next? What do you do next? You take a snapshot of the VM and you click the resume task sequence on the desktop, because then it will continue, run sysprep, and capture it to the image. So just because we need to do one thing manual, we don't do everything manual. We do 99% automated, and then things that need to be manual have to be manual. But this is how we add a suspend to it. Now, if you 3 weeks from now needs to go back and do a tweak, you can just revert to the snapshot in this state in the sequence, do the change, take a new snapshot, and continue, and then you have a new image. So by using snapshots and reverting back and forth multiple times, you will save hours and hours when developing that image. Often customers will do this 20, 25 times before they get their image ready. And every hour you can save in that process is an hour saved. Yeah. The question is, can I rephrase the question, sir? How do I enable Windows updates? What do I want to patch my image to? That's very common. Since I'm using Light Touch, it will not go into the SUP in ConfigMgr. So for my reference image, I actually take that extra whole 10 minutes or 12 minutes even to set up a dedicated WSUS that I only use for Light Touch deployments. Because one of the settings, I can enable this one here, these update actions, and hit OK. And then on my properties, because by default it will go out to Microsoft Update, I don't want that. I will be able to control my updates. I will specify the WSUS server value, and I will point it to whatever my SUS server is, like this. And then I have updates. Yes, sir? If it's possible to patch the server from the sequence? The question was, or comment was, can't I do offline patching in ConfigMgr 12? Yes, you could that too. That's also an option. But normally, if you're already building an image, it makes sense to take the main burden at the time you build it. And some patches, they simply won't work offline. For example, I have customers reporting in that Office setups, Office deployments, can break in certain languages already deployed as an update offline, but will work fine if you do this a build and capture process. But it's nothing that will prevent you from doing exactly that. So it's a good comment though. So you have multiple options, but this is your question. So the boot image is done, and I need to go and enable it for Pixie. So I will right click, I will go properties, data source, enable for Pixie, and I will wait. I will review my log file, not that log file, this one, and we should see the package being our boot image with a setting here. Found updates. It's now updated. Good. Now I need to add a DP. So I need to distribute the content to this package. So I will add it to my only distribution point. And I'm good to go. Then I need a second boot image, because I need to have two. So I will create a 64-bit one, not because I will never use it, because I will not. Oops. But I need it for Pixie. ConfigMgr is extracting the netboot files from the boot image. So I will select a 64-bit platform and hit next. And now I will have a 64-bit boot image. Again, only needed for Pixie boot. You should always use a 32-bit boot image for both 32 and 64-bit deployments. If you use ConfigMgr to create reference images, you can't really do that. Then you need to have a 64-bit boot image. But since we create our reference image in this scenario outside ConfigMgr in light touch, I don't have to care. I can use a single boot image. And a single boot image means it's less costly to maintain, easier to find drivers to, and guess what? All your custom scripts and actions that you have from previous deployment solutions normally works fine in WinPE 32-bit. Because the 64-bit versions is simply missing the entire 32-bit Windows subsystem. So if you try to run a 32-bit application on a 64-bit boot image, it will break. It will work in Windows, but not in WinPE. Any questions? All right. For my 32-bit boot image, when it's being added, it should store the files in here. Those files are being extracted from the boot image and put in this folder. Now I will be able to pixie boot machines that advertise themselves as a 32-bit architecture, meaning a 5-year-old PC. Most of your machines will not advertise itself as a 32-bit. It will advertise itself as a 64-bit machine, even if you deploy a 32-bit OS to it. And if you go into that folder right now, it's only one file. There are supposed to be 6 files in here. And this is because I have not yet created the 64-bit boot image, and I have not yet assigned it to be a boot image that is supposed to be used together with Pixie. All right. So how many of you have used, normal light touch for deployments in any way? A few of you. How do you assign settings in that platform? If you want the deployment to join the machine into a specific domain or a specific OU or something like that, how do you do that in light touch? Settings file. So now I will teach you the difference between light touch deployments and ConfigMgr deployments. In light touch deployments, you are going to this folder and you will double click this file, the custom settings ini file. It will have the rules for this deployment, the settings. All right. Now, for ConfigMgr, it's more tricky because we need to find another folder. I will eventually put it in my packages, but for now, I have an example here. I will modify this folder, this file. Same stuff. This is a settings file for ConfigMgr. Configuring OSD to join a machine into a specific OU. And in this case, I'm also providing some additional information about what profiles to back up in a refresh and what templates to control that backup with, so that I control what data that I will migrate when I reinstall my machine or when I replace my machines. But the point is, the sequence and this text file, they work together. Meaning, this one, for example, will disable BitLocker. Even if I enable that action in my sequence, it will still be disabled because I told it so. Many of the actions that you have in the sequence have conditions on them. And the BitLocker action in specific has a condition saying, if this one is yes, don't do this, or rather skip this. They have to evaluate it true. So let me see how the boot image process is going. It's done. I have a 64-bit boot image. I will assign or configure it for Pixie, like I did with a 32-bit one. Deploy from Pixie. And I will wait for the update. Found package properties update or update notification. It's now updated, or soonish. I will distribute it to my DP. Now I'm done with my boot images. Now I need to do two things. I need to add an OS image and I need to create my sequence. So the image I created earlier, this is my Vim backup or captured Vim. So I will move that to my packages folder. And I will add it as a package here, as an image package. So I will add it. Specify the name. Give it the name. I'm good to go. I will wait to add a DP because I will add it for all the packages at the same time. But now I'm done with the pre-configured steps. Now I need to create a sequence, because when creating that sequence, it will help me create all the other packages needed. So I will run the wizard, give it a good name. Configure to join a domain. I will configure it to use my join account. Will never be used to capture an image. I will select my boot image, my 32-bit boot image. I will create a new package for MDT. So I will specify the packages folder. MDT 2012 beta 2. And I will give the package name the same name. I select my image that I added. I will create a new ConfigMgr package. There are 2 included. None of them work with the sequence. Don't use them. I need a new useempty package. useempty4. I will name it useempty4. I need a new settings package I will call this one Windows 7 x64 settings, and I will name it the same. And I'm done. The sequence will now create all those packages, and there are two final things left for me to do before we are ready. It's coming. Oh, this is exciting. It doesn't get much more exciting than this. It's now adding the sequence. It's done. What I need to do now, I need to deploy it. I need to deploy it to a collection where I have my machines. So we just deploy it to all unknown computers. I will make it available. I will make it available for Pixie. I'm good. Default settings for the rest. And now I need to distribute all my packages that I created. And now in ConfigMgr 12, I can do it directly from here. I can select my sequence, I can select distribute content, and it will find all the packages, and it will allow me to add them to DP all together at one time. I will wait 10 minutes. They will be distributed. I can go to client. I can hit F12 and have a deployment. Thank you, guys.